Before you answer a single exam question, before you quote a single theorist, pause and confront this unsettling thought. Almost everything you believe about men and women was decided before you were born. Not by biology, not by nature, but by society. The clothes you were dressed in, the emotions you were encouraged to show, the ambitions you were told were appropriate, even the silence you were expected to accept. None of it was accidental. Gender feels natural precisely because it has been taught so thoroughly, repeated so constantly, and enforced so subtly that it disappears into common sense. And that is what makes it one of the most powerful social forces shaping human history. This is why gender is not just another topic in the CSS syllabus. It is a framework for understanding power, inequality, and identity itself. When societies insist that certain roles are natural, they often use nature as an excuse to preserve hierarchy. Gender studies begins with a disruptive question. If gender roles were created by humans, can they also be changed by humans? That single question has unsettled traditions, challenged laws, and reshaped political movements across the world. To answer it, we must start with precise definitions. Sex refers to biological classification, usually based on anatomy, chromosomes, and reproductive functions. Gender refers to the social meanings attached to those biological categories, the roles, behaviors, expectations, and identities that societies assign to people labeled male or female. Social construction means that these meanings are not fixed by biology, but are produced through culture, institutions, language, and repeated social practices. Sociologist Judith Lorber described gender as a fundamental organizing principle of society, one that divides people into categories that are treated as different and unequal. From the moment of birth, individuals are gendered through names, colors, toys, discipline, and expectations. These practices do not merely reflect differences. They actively create them by shaping behavior, opportunity, and self-perception over time. This is the second video of the Crash CSS Gender Studies series, and I am your instructor, Aliyah. I will guide you through the key theories, thinkers, data, and debates that explain how gender is socially constructed and why this understanding is essential for Gender Studies CSS exam and for understanding society itself. To grasp gender as a social construction, it must be placed firmly within history. Gender ideas do not float above society as timeless truths. They are shaped by economic systems, political authority, religion, and cultural practices. What appears natural in one era often looks unfamiliar or even irrational in another. This historical variability directly challenges biological determinism. Simone de Beauvoir's landmark assertion in 1949, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman," captured this idea by showing that womanhood is produced through education, discipline, and social expectation, rather than biology alone. Historical evidence supports this claim. In pre-industrial Europe, children's clothing did not rigidly distinguish boys from girls. Young boys frequently wore dresses and long hair, a practice that caused no crisis of masculinity. Only with the rise of industrial capitalism and the separation of public and private spheres in the 19th century did strict gender distinctions harden. Men became associated with paid labor and public authority, while women were confined to domesticity. Similarly, work such as textile production or teaching, now coded feminine, was historically male-dominated. Judith Lorber emphasizes that social construction explains both historical change and cross-cultural diversity. Societies organize gender to serve social needs. Indigenous North American cultures recognized two-spirit identities, while South Asian societies institutionalized hijras long before modern legal recognition. These categories emerged because societies created social space for them. History therefore exposes gender norms as human inventions, shaped by circumstance rather than biology. For CSS aspirants, historicizing gender is essential. It allows you to explain gender roles as products of time, power, and material conditions rather than fixed natural facts. Queer theory radicalizes social constructionism by questioning the stability of identity itself. Emerging from LGBTQ political struggles and post-structuralist philosophy in the late 20th century, queer theory rejects the idea that categories such as man, woman, heterosexual, or homosexual represent natural groups. Instead, it argues that these identities are historically produced labels, regulated through law, language, and culture. The central claim is that there is no inevitable link between sex, gender, and desire. Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity is foundational here. Butler argues that gender is not an inner essence, but the effect of repeated actions. Through everyday behaviors, speech, dress, gestures, emotional expression, individuals perform masculinity or femininity. Over time, these performances create the illusion of a stable identity. What appears natural is actually the result of repetition and social approval. This insight is politically powerful. If gender is produced through performance, it can be disrupted. Examples such as men in caregiving roles, women in positions of military or political authority, or drag performances expose the artificiality of gender rules. Queer theory also challenges the idea that heterosexuality is normal, showing how it is actively enforced through institutions such as marriage, education, and religion. For CSS students, queer theory sharpens analytical depth. It teaches you to interrogate categories rather than accept them, and to examine how power operates through classification. It moves gender studies from roles and norms to the very foundations of identity. A frequent critique of social constructionism argues that while gender may be social, sex is purely biological. Social theorists respond by asking how biology itself is interpreted and organized. Biologist Anne Fausto Sterling famously argued that labeling bodies as male or female is not a neutral scientific act, but a social decision guided by cultural norms. Medical professionals rely on agreed criteria: chromosomes, hormones, and genitals, yet none of these produces a perfectly binary outcome. The existence of intersex individuals highlights this complexity. Intersex people are born with variations in sex characteristics that do not fit typical definitions of male or female. United Nations data estimates that up to 1.7% of the population has intersex traits. Despite this natural variation, societies enforce a strict binary, often through early surgical interventions intended to normalize bodies according to social expectations. Biology still matters. Research shows that chromosomes and prenatal hormones influence physical development and may affect aspects of identity. Studies of intersex children raised against their chromosomal sex suggest that biology interacts with socialization in complex ways. Social constructionism does not deny biology. It argues that biology does not explain social meaning on its own. Society decides which biological differences matter and what consequences they carry. For CSS answers, this balanced position, biological foundation with social interpretation, is critical. Masculinity and femininity are often treated as singular ideals, but sociological research shows they exist in multiple forms. Masculinity refers to traits culturally associated with men, such as authority, toughness, and emotional restraint. Sociologist Raewyn Connell argued that societies construct hierarchies of masculinities. At the top sits hegemonic masculinity, the culturally dominant form that legitimizes male power and marginalizes alternatives. Hegemonic masculinity pressures men to conform to narrow expectations and devalues traits such as vulnerability or care. Alongside it exist other masculinities shaped by class, race, and sexuality, including marginalized and subordinated masculinities. Their existence proves masculinity is not biologically fixed, but socially ranked. Femininity operates similarly. Traditionally associated with nurturing, modesty, and passivity, femininity has been rewarded when it supports male dominance and penalized when it challenges it. Feminist scholars argue there are multiple femininities, ranging from compliant domestic ideals to assertive professional identities. These forms vary across cultures and historical periods. Understanding multiple masculinities and femininities helps explain how gender inequality is maintained. Power attaches itself to certain gender performances while devaluing others. This framework is essential for CSS discussions of patriarchy and social hierarchy. The nature versus culture debate has long dominated discussions of gender. Biological factors such as chromosomes and hormones influence physical development, but socialization plays an equally powerful role in shaping behavior and identity. Contemporary scholarship emphasizes interaction rather than opposition between biology and culture. From birth, children are treated differently based on perceived sex. Parents, teachers, and media communicate expectations about emotion, ability, and ambition. Judith Lorber observed that identical behaviors are interpreted differently depending on whether a child is labeled male or female. Over time, these interpretations shape self-concept and opportunity. Historical change reinforces culture's influence. Practices once considered normal, such as boys wearing dresses or women performing heavy labor, later became unacceptable as social structures shifted. Psychological studies also demonstrate that encouragement and discouragement shape interests more than innate ability. The conclusion is clear. Biology provides potential, but culture determines expression. Gender development is socially patterned, not biologically predetermined. Feminist theory provides the intellectual foundation of gender studies. Simone de Beauvoir framed gender as a process of becoming. Judith Lorber conceptualized gender as a social institution. Rosemary Tong mapped feminist traditions, including liberal feminism's focus on legal equality, Marxist feminism's emphasis on class and labor, and radical feminism's critique of patriarchy. Intersectionality, articulated by Kimberlé Crenshaw, deepens this analysis by showing that gender interacts with race, class, and nationality. Gender is not experienced in isolation. South Asian scholar Naila Kabeer applied this approach to development studies, defining empowerment as the expansion of agency, the ability to make meaningful choices and act upon them. These theorists collectively show that gender inequality is embedded in social structures. For CSS aspirants, referencing these thinkers demonstrates conceptual clarity and analytical depth. Empirical evidence strongly supports the argument that gender is socially constructed rather than biologically determined. One of the most authoritative datasets is the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, which consistently measures gender disparities across 4 domains: education, health, economic participation, and political empowerment. Despite global progress, the report confirms that no country has achieved complete gender parity, demonstrating that gender inequality is a structural and global phenomenon rather than a natural outcome. Pakistan's ranking near the bottom of the index is particularly revealing. Women's literacy rates remain significantly lower than men's. Female labor force participation hovers around 20 to 22%, and women occupy less than 20% of parliamentary seats. These disparities cannot be explained by biology, as cognitive and physical capacities do not account for such systematic exclusion. Instead, they reflect social norms, patriarchal institutions, restricted mobility, early marriage, and unequal access to education, all of which are socially produced constraints. Anthropological evidence further strengthens this argument. In South Asia, the Hijra or Khwaja Sira community represents a culturally recognized third gender category that predates colonial rule. Their existence challenges the rigid male-female binary, often presented as natural. Similarly, cross-cultural studies by Margaret Mead in Sex and Temperament in 3 Primitive Societies show that traits labeled masculine or feminine vary dramatically across societies, proving that gender roles are learned, not innate. Thus, statistical data and ethnographic research together transform gender theory into observable social reality, a linkage that is particularly valuable in CSS answers, where evidence-based arguments are rewarded. Understanding gender as a social construction carries profound social and political implications. If gender roles are produced by culture, law, and institutions, then they are open to reform and transformation. Policies such as gender-sensitive education, equal employment legislation, inheritance rights, and political quotas are not attempts to fight nature, but efforts to correct socially produced inequalities. However, resistance to gender reform remains strong. This resistance is often framed in the language of tradition, religion, or biology, portraying gender hierarchies as timeless and inevitable. Social constructionist theory exposes this strategy by showing how appeals to nature are historically used to legitimize power structures. Simone de Beauvoir's famous assertion, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman," captures how social expectations, not biology, shape gendered lives. Contemporary debates over women's work, dress codes, political leadership, and transgender rights further demonstrate that gender is deeply political. Media representations, school curricula, and legal definitions continuously reinforce or challenge dominant gender norms. In Pakistan, debates over women's participation in public life highlight the tension between traditional patriarchal norms and constitutional guarantees of equality. For CSS candidates, engaging with these debates sharpens policy analysis, critical reasoning, and sociological imagination. Gender is not merely a descriptive category, it is a lens through which power, inequality, and social change can be analyzed. The concept of gender as a social construction fundamentally reshapes our understanding of inequality, power, and social order. Rather than viewing gender differences as fixed outcomes of biology, this perspective demonstrates that gender roles, expectations, and hierarchies are historically produced, culturally reinforced, and institutionally maintained. Family structures, education systems, religious interpretations, legal frameworks, and economic arrangements collectively shape what it means to be masculine or feminine in any society. From a sociological perspective, this means that gender inequality is not destiny. If gender norms are created through social processes, they can also be transformed through deliberate social action. Historical evidence clearly shows that women's access to education, employment, and political participation has expanded in societies that introduced legal reforms and challenged traditional norms. These changes occurred not because biology altered, but because social values, laws, and power relations evolved over time. For competitive examinations, such as CSS, this understanding is especially valuable. It enables candidates to move beyond purely descriptive answers toward analytical and evaluative writing. Instead of simply stating that women face disadvantage, a constructionist approach explains why such disadvantages exist, how they are reproduced through institutions, and what mechanisms can be used to reduce them. This approach allows candidates to integrate theory, empirical evidence, and policy relevance, which is a key indicator of high-quality answers in social science papers. Rethinking gender also helps in understanding broader sociological themes such as social stratification, legitimacy of authority, resistance to change, and identity politics. Gender analysis reveals how societies justify inequality and how marginalized groups challenge dominant power structures. In this way, gender is not limited to women's issues alone, but is central to understanding both social stability and social change. In conclusion, gender is not merely an academic concept confined to textbooks. It is a foundational element of social life that influences opportunities, rights, and power relations. Recognizing gender as socially constructed equips students, policymakers, and civil servants with the intellectual tools to critically evaluate policies, question inherited norms, and work toward more equitable and inclusive social arrangements. This perspective strengthens CSS answers by demonstrating depth, critical thinking, and a clear link between theory and real-world social issues. As we conclude this session on the social construction of gender, I hope this discussion has helped you see gender not as destiny, but as a powerful social system shaped by history, culture, and institutions. If this video added clarity to your gender studies preparation for CSS, your support truly matters. Please take a moment to like the video, share it with fellow aspirants, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming lectures in this Crash CSS Gender Studies series. Your engagement helps this academic content reach more serious learners. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, where we continue unpacking gender theories and their real-world implications.